Okay, hi everyone. It is 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Central, and I wanted to welcome you to our September WonderChat. I am Misty Hicks. I am the co-founder of Wonders and Worries and the director of the Registered Writer Program, and I'm so glad you could join us today. Let me just step through a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. As you know, if you've been on these before with us, we do not use the feature. We will use the Q&A feature. And I'll moderate that and watch those that come through and then present them out loud so everyone can hear those. The recorded webinar and any supplemental materials we might want to add will be on our website, probably by the weekend. And then the one thing I do want to let you know, and I'm going to apologize in advance, is my location today is very, 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 very windy. So I am hopeful that we will be able to get through this hour without any technological glitches. If we do, Kathleen and I have talked about this, she and I will work and we'll record it separately and then I'll post it. So fingers crossed, so everyone, that we get through with no technological issues. Regarding evaluations and PDUs, at the end of the presentation, when you log out, an evaluation screen will pop up. I would really appreciate if you would fill that in. It totally helps us as we move forward. If you forget or you can't do the one right after the presentation finishes, you'll get an email tomorrow that will have the link as well to that evaluation. You only need to do one, but I would love it if you did complete one. And then regarding the PDU process, if you want to listen today just for professional growth, that is absolutely no charge for that. If you do need PDUs, you can go on our website. At the end of the presentation, I'll have the QR code for that. Or you can link it from the email tomorrow, and you can get to the store to purchase the post-assessment. So you'll be able to take the post-assessment and then earn your PDU certificate. So today I am thrilled to have Kathleen McCue with us. I am so lucky and grateful that Kathleen and I have spent a lot of time together on some writing projects and other projects, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm especially grateful that she's with us today to share her wisdom with you guys. There's so much that she has in that brain, and I could just sit and listen to her all day. You know, she's an author, she's a skilled clinician, she's been so involved in ACLP. I could use this whole hour probably to go through her bio resume, but I don't think she really needs that much because everyone probably realizes who she is. But I'm grateful to you, Kathleen, for being here with us today.
Glad to be here.
So we're going to walk through the impact. I'm so glad you're here. So we're going to walk through this presentation today, but because some of the information is things you might have heard before, and because we have Kathleen here, we're really going to just sort of talk around our slides. We're not going to so much like read bullet by bullet, but we're going to talk around the slides to really help lay the foundation for thinking about the impact of an adult's illness on children and teens. Our next two WonderChats, the one in October and November, will focus more on intervention. Brief interventions will be in October, and then November will be sort of long-term support. So be on the lookout for those as well. But Kathleen and I really today just want to lay the foundation for you of what to think about and what could it possibly be like for families as they're walking through this process. All right, so let's dive in with the potential impact of illness on the family as a whole, and then we're going to move through specifically to children and teens. So when you think about it, much like the families we work with in pediatrics, there can be that time, the demarcation line, right, where someone is diagnosed, there's an accident, or there's a change, and things in a family are defined by before and after. Not necessarily terrible, normal can come later, but that's that line. You know, you'll hear families say, oh, that was the summer after I finished chemotherapy, or, oh, the fall before I had to be in a wheelchair, we XYZ. And sort of it's a grounding place or a point in time for families. That's a significant impact in lots of different ways. So that diagnosis can be devastating to the family. The parents are concerned about the impact on their children, and sometimes even more worried about their children than themselves. What's going to happen with them? And they don't necessarily always have the wherewithal at that moment to be able to help them and support them. It can impact the child's mood, their ability to cope, their behavior at home and school. And a lot of times what we find is there's this mutual pretense, right? Like where everyone kind of knows something is going on in the family, but they're not really talking about it to each other. And so that really can have an impact on trust within a family and really promotes those misconceptions that we see children have related to illness or changes in a family. And so I feel like our job, and I'm sure many of us feel like our job, is to really promote that honest, accurate communication within the family. You know, yes, we absolutely probably need to support families in doing that, but that is going to be essential as they move forward. Kathleen, what do you think when you think about the impact of illness on families in general?
Right. Well, all of those points that you discussed, Missy, are really critical kind of assessment points that we all make when we first meet people, and they're the kind of the core that you carry with you when you know that you're going to have an encounter with a family dealing with a serious illness or injury. But there's another factor that's really important, and I don't know our audience real well. I know there's 60 or so of you out there listening, and I don't know how many of you work in a community setting, how many of you are in private practice, how many of you are in a hospital, but where you are working and what
Oh, Kathleen, we lost you.
ended, because you need to know right from the beginning and have an awareness right from the beginning about what kind of commitment you can make
Kathleen.
to this family. You know, we all know the very important medical saying, first do no harm. And this is so critical in this situation, because if you are in a hospital and you really are limited to a single encounter with a parent in an emergency room, with a parent in an inpatient unit, you get to talk to them one time, maybe never even see the children, then you're going to plan your interventions one way. If you're in a community setting or in private practice where you can have extended contacts, maybe group contacts, maybe whole family sessions, then you're going to plan your intervention another way. So, and a good kind of rule of thumb is the more limited you are, the more you have to make your interventions tend toward the educational and a little bit less focused on the emotional. I know that sounds difficult because obviously we're talking about very emotional situations, but you really don't want to be the person who opens the door to a flood of emotions and then walks away and isn't allowed to see that family again to help them pull that all together. So whoever's listening out there right now to this and watching this chat, just really think about what kind of commitment can I make to this family? Not only think about what their needs are, but what kind of commitment you can make, and then definitely kind of make your plans around that ability.
That's right. The things that we all know, children know something's going on in the family. I think kids want to handle things in a positive way. Sometimes they don't know how and they need a little help and support. And one of the things is that we notice, especially with adult illness, is, and I guess with childhood illness too, is that they want to protect the adults around them, right, Kathleen? Like sometimes they don't want to like bring things up because they'll say, oh, mom might start crying, or it'll upset dad because he's trying to keep everything together. And I think that we see that happen with kids.
It's one of those situations where the parents are trying to protect the children are trying to protect the parents, and nobody's coming together to have honest discussions about what the impact of all this is going to be on their family and on each of their lives.
Yeah, and that goes back to that mutual pretense point, right? Like no one's talking, and then no one can really help support that resiliency over time. The other thing I like to think about a lot with children and information in particular is that self-dosing. You know, the self-dosing themselves of information they can take in. And I think that sometimes children are better at it than adults, as far as they'll take it in and then they'll move on, and either behaviorally or verbally, they'll take a break and they'll check out for a minute and they'll chew on that information and then they'll come back. But I know, like, one of the things that parents said frequently is, did they not hear me say I had cancer? Because all they cared about was going to play basketball. And helping parents normalize that and talking about that, I think, is so important.
Right. Parents used to tell us all the time that children would, on the day of group, for example, the children wouldn't talk about the cancer for the whole time that they, or whatever the illness was, for the whole time prior to that group meeting. On the way to the group, in the car, they would start to ask some questions about what was going on. It was like they had a point in time where they were going to open that door and process some of that information. And then afterwards, they plan to close it and go right on back to their lives. So I think that's really, really typical. And we have to prepare parents for that. You know, when I look at this slide, what I think about is that the children, parents want to do a single presentation to their children. When they sit down with the child life specialist, I'm sure you've all had this experience, they want to know kind of everything they should say over a long period of time, because they kind of plan to do it all at once. And one of the first things that we have to do when we're meeting with parents is help them understand that you really only do a little bit at a time. You really just give them the information that's most appropriate at that moment. Just like you do when you're preparing a child for a procedure. You don't tell them what's going to happen 3 weeks after the procedure. You prepare them for things one step at a time. And again, this is going to be an issue because if you're only seeing a family a single time, you want to help them deal with what's most immediate, not what's way down the road. That's got to come in another session.
Yes, agreed. And that's a perfect segue, Kathleen, to our talking about the developmental impact. And we're going to go through the age groups and the importance of, you know, like sort of the touch points for each of those age groups. But I know you've talked to me before about sort of what order do we go in? Do you want to share some about that?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that every one of us, every one of you listening has probably given presentations about the development of children and children's responses to different components of either trauma or stress or anything that's important in their lives. And we always start with infants and we go through toddlers and preschoolers and school-age children and teens. And it's kind of a routine. I mean, most of us could do it in our sleep now. But when you're working with the children of an adult patient, what you really need to do is to figure out first of all, what is the age groups represented in the family? And then what is the parent especially telling you is their biggest area of concern? Because they may not need you to go through all the developmental levels, even if they have children in several different levels. They may need you to focus on just their teenager or just their preschooler. And so that's where you start. It's nice for you to have all this developmental information that Missy's put together on these slides for you. Putting these slides together would make a great handout for you to give to a family who have multiple ages multiple ages of children in their family. But that's probably not what you'll focus on. You will listen. And, you know, again, this comes back to your assessment. And I know we talk about assessment over and over again. It's a huge part of what we all learn in child life, but I can't stress enough how important assessment is when you're working with the family of the adults or the family, including the children of the adult patient, because that is going to lead you specifically down your path. And you'll change constantly based on what you're assessing the biggest concerns of the parent are, the biggest concerns of the children are, and the reactions of the children to the situation.
Yeah, and Kathleen, you and I have talked lots about this, but and one of the things that you have talked about and stressed is the importance during that assessment, the importance of the caregiver's assessment. So you want to talk to the parent who is sick, has the injury, the patient parent, but you also want to be sure that you're talking to the caregiver. Anything else you want to add about that?
Well, yeah, and again, I feel like I'm certainly talking to people who know these things very well and completely understand them, but there's no better person to tell you about their children than the parents. That's the person who will let you know what kinds of experiences their children have had with high stress situations, what kind of personalities their children have. Are they children who worry and are anxious and kind of perseverate on things, or are they children who are easygoing and kind of laugh things off? Are they avoiders? You know, the parents.
Oh, lost you for a second. Kathleen?
absolutely going to lead you to figuring out what you should focus on in the time that you have available to work with this family.
So we kind of lost you for a second, but I think your point was well made about the importance of that. One of the other things that I have to always remember is when you're working with a family with an adult illness, this was an early lesson I learned early on, where I scheduled an intake to talk to the parent caregiver, so not the patient that was diagnosed with cancer, but the caregiver, just to be mindful of, like, she wasn't feeling well and that sort of thing. And when I got there for the visit, she came downstairs and that was all she could do that day, was to pull herself together. And she said, they are my children. They are still my children. And I want to share information from my perspective too. And it was so telling to me. I was trying to be so sensitive and not, but really giving them that option and letting them choose that, because that was important for her. And I needed that information from her. So we can't forget that by assuming that they are not feeling well enough or they can't do it, unless of course they can't.
And this is one of the places where we probably differ a little bit from our normal child life approach to things, because when you are in a hospital, or even sometimes when you're in private practice, you may be the one who, say, prepares a child for their own medical experience, and the parent may choose for you to do that. But when it's the adult who's ill or injured or somehow dealing with a medical crisis, they may very well be the ones to choose to be the information givers for their children. And even when they're not, any empowerment that you can provide that will allow them to be is going to continue to build that trust and build that kind of resiliency that Missy was talking about a little while ago. So the focus is not so much you doing it, but the focus is, how can you empower this family? How can you empower the well parent, the ill parent, anybody else in the family, a grandparent, to be the information provider, to be the support person, to be the person who's there to provide the hugs and the support around a tearful time. So it's a little bit of a shift for all of us who work with the children of adult patients, because our focus is much more strengthen that family unit, and that means strengthen the adults in that family unit.
Great. So we're gonna put these slides up, and we know a lot of you know this content already, so we're not gonna read through these at all. If there's a specific question about any of these bullets, then go ahead and type it in the Q&A. But Kathleen, I'm gonna turn it to you. What do you think needs to be emphasized here about infants and toddlers?
Sure. Well, it's really interesting. We don't even have a video or, pictures or anything, because what do you do with an infant and toddler? They're not cognitive beings in that sense. We're not going to be teaching them about things. Many parents, I think the thing you need to remember with infants and toddlers is, most of the time when you're working with a family, if they have an infant or a younger toddler in their family, they're going to make that child the least priority, because they're going to assume that child can't really understand. You can't really tell them things about the medical situation. They're not the most vulnerable in many ways. That's the assumption that many parents will make. So when you ask them about their children, they tell you that they have 4 children and they describe 3 of them, I'll bet you that 4th one will be an infant or a toddler. And that's why they didn't describe that child, because they thought they were too young. That's the thing you hear the most. But it is very important, if you are helping a family, understand how to help their children, especially early on in a diagnosis time, to bring up issues around infants and toddlers and their reaction to things like separation from the primary caregiver, or a change in their routines, all of the kinds of things that you all know impact infants and toddlers. Parents may not think about, if grandma only takes care of that child once every 3 or 4 weeks, for a day while mom goes shopping, she may not realize that now grandma coming over every single day and taking care of that baby is going to be a huge change for that baby. So, and that change may result in behavioral or distress kinds of responses from that child. So you really do, this is an educational kind of point that you can provide to parents, is that there may be reactions to the stress of a family illness, and that parents can minimize those reactions by minimizing some of the kinds of things that tend to produce them, like separation, like routine changes, like physical changes, those kinds of things.
Great. So we're going to illustrate a couple of the rest of the age groups. We're going to illustrate with a video first to kind of get your mind around that age group. And then I'm going to turn it to Kathleen. We have a bullet slide, which we won't discuss, and I'm going to turn it to Kathleen to kind of make some comments about that age group. So here we have our preschool.
Just like the game that we played. But this activity is going to be about feelings about your daddy and feelings about your daddy being sick.
I'm sad.
You're sad.
Because I won't get to do my favorite dance. The bully dance, and my bully showed out.
Oh, you won't be able to do that dance with him anymore. Yeah.
Let me like.
Is it a silly dance?
Yeah, it's the silliest dance.
Okay. Well, you said sad, so let's see if we can find sad on the list. This one is sad.
Sad?
And this one is hurt.
I get hurt when my daddy isn't here. My heart gets hurt at me and mine's sad.
Yeah. So you know what? We can circle both of these then, because you feel sometimes sad and sometimes your heart hurts. So let's circle
my daddy.
those. Yeah, about your daddy.
I don't want him to die.
I know.
He won't get to see my babies.
I know. You really.
Crazy.
That one is silly.
Angry.
Close.
So what do you think, Kathleen? I'm going to turn that to you.
Isn't that a wonderful age? The words don't always match the emotions that you see on the part of a preschooler. And of course, everybody knows that from all the work you do with preschoolers. We certainly saw the beginning of a response to an emotional response, but there wasn't a lot of feeling behind the emotional response that we saw that child share. And that's real typical for that age. So this is a great age to be able to help parents understand that children can talk about these emotions and it doesn't destroy their lives. It does, when a child says my heart hurts because I worry about my daddy, that child's not falling apart while saying that. And that's really important for parents to hear and see. A lot of the activities that you'll learn about in the next couple of chats are activities that you can share with parents, that hopefully your preschool children will share with parents, so that they can understand that the children can process these things, and they process them, and then they go on and talk about silly dances, and they go from topic to topic, and that's perfectly okay. We saw the egocentrism in that child's discussion. I mean, what she wanted to talk about was how things affected her, and that's real typical for this age. We want to honor that always. It's healthy. You would actually hope that would be what a preschooler would do in their play and in their discussion. And of course, you see kind of an activity here, but in the next two chats, you're going to talk a lot about different play techniques, because that's the way to get to preschoolers. We all use those techniques all the time.
And I especially on this one, that the highlight for me is that self-dosing. She talks about, I don't want my daddy to die. And then she goes, right when she's done, she moves to silly. Like, oh, here's silly. Like she was ready to just make the shift, and she did it. And our child life specialist followed her beautifully, with that.
Many parents' biggest fear would be that their child couldn't say something about dying and then go on and be okay. And that's a perfect example of the fact that children can, and we can reassure parents that children do it, because they do it all the time when you work with this population. They can talk about it, they can say it will make them sad, and then they can go on and do something that's very positive for them and very coping.
So here we're going to listen to Gabby, and then we'll move on after that one.
Hi, my name's Gabby, and I'm 8, and my mom had breast cancer. Sometimes when we talk, our feelings are sad, and sometimes we talk about being mad. I thought I gave it to my mom because before she got cancer, a lot of times I yelled at her. It was hard for me to look at her. And if I did look at her, I always called her Baldy, because I was mad at her for losing her hair, and I didn't know that it would grow back because I was too much on my temper. My life changed because my mom was bald, and she didn't look the same anymore. I thought she looked older. And when her hair started growing back, she looked like her grandma to me. I was embarrassed that my mom didn't have hair because when kids saw her, they always started laughing. When she came to pick me up one day, she didn't wear a wig because it was hot. And at camp, everybody, when we left, when we turned around, I heard them giggling. And I felt really embarrassed, and my heart hurt for that, because I love my mom. My aunt had it, and she died. And I really felt bad, so I was scared that my mom might die. It took me a long time to get over of thinking that my mom would die, but then one day my cousin came over. She told me that my mom wouldn't die because the doctors got it in time. It made me feel better. Hi, my name's Gab.
I'm going to turn this to you, Kathleen. And actually, I'm going to say to our listeners, because of our tech glitch, we probably might go over a little bit, so I hope that's okay, but I just want to put that out there now. So Kathleen, let's talk about the school-age child.
Gosh, what an articulate young lady, huh? I mean, you don't usually get a child commenting on all those components of what it's like to be a school-age child and deal with cancer and a parent all at once in a single session. But everything that she talked about was really important. Obviously, this is an age where body image and all of that sort of thing becomes really important. So the embarrassment that she discussed was typical for this age. So all the things that you're seeing in these in the previous video and in this one are things that you need to have in the back of your mind, so that when you're dealing with a child in this age group, you can help, especially if you're helping to a parent to guess what issues might come up. Those are some things that you can suggest. So this child has gone through the gamut of reactions: fear of death, embarrassment, guilt and responsibility. That's a real typical one in this age. Many children in this latency age do somehow manage to blame themselves or feel that they're responsible, or either at the end of preschool or into latency, into school age years, that they're somehow responsible for what has happened. So these are real typical kinds of comments. You won't see all of them from all children, and you know, when you're working with an individual child or an individual family, you may see some component of them. We don't usually plant those things in children's minds. You let children come up with them on their own if they're there, because you won't see all of them all the time. So it's really important to kind of clarify. And as she talked about misunderstanding kind of about death and even about the illness of her mom, I think that's real typical. This is an age that wants a lot of accurate information. If they're dealing with a parent who's had, say, for example, an amputation, maybe a traumatic amputation or one related to an illness, they have lots of questions about that. Questions that adults tend to not go to. Questions about where the limb went and who's got it and how are they going to throw it away and all of that sort of thing. You hear that from your pediatric patients all the time in this age group, and you're going to hear that from your school age children of adult patients that are ill. You may see some clinging to some things like hair, for example. You may see children who want to collect their parents' hair, or save it, or have a sample of it. All of those things are real typical as they're thinking about physical changes.
Okay, so we're going to listen to a late school age / early teen, followed by an adolescent, and then I'm going to turn it back to Kathleen.
The day that I got the news that my mom had cancer, it was like late. And I had just come from shopping with my dad for groceries, and my mom was talking to my dad, and I heard job and cancer, and I was like, who has cancer, your boss? And she was like, no, I do. And that just, right there, that just came to such a big shock, like, no, I do. We just spent the whole day crying, I guess, and worrying what was going to happen. She was in the hospital a lot, and when I'd go see her, I'd see these tubes with blood in them. And that scared me a lot. It felt weird, like I couldn't believe that was my mother's body. that that was what cancer did to her. For a while, I didn't talk to anybody except my best friend, Daniela. I would talk to her. You know, she was the person I could put my head on her shoulder and cry. She would always have a wet shoulder from me. And that's really the only person I felt that I could talk to. I couldn't talk to my mother about that. Any little thing would set me off in school. I'd start to cry in the middle of a lesson. You know, in health ed especially, when they would talk about cancer. The way I got through it was I would read books, learn more about cancer, because the more I learned about it, the safer I felt, like I knew the disease. I didn't blame myself for it, because I guess I was old enough to know that that wasn't my fault. The years have gone by and I've gotten through it, and I thought I could never get through it. I thought, you know, I was just going to be stuck in that situation. And everything's going back to normal now. I look back and I go, God, you know, I was really strong to get through that. How did I do that? The day.
Then I'm going to go ahead and play the adolescent, and then I'm going to turn it to Kathleen.
So tell me about yourself.
My name is Emily. I am a freshman at Magnificat High School, and I dance.
How old are you, Emily?
I'm 15.
Okay. So I understand that you've had a connection to someone with the breast cancer gene. Can you just tell me the story of that, how that happened?
Well, when I was 11, my mom told me that she has the BRCA2 gene and that she needed to have surgery to help prevent cancer. And she asked me if I wanted to get tested for it, and she said that most people don't get tested till they're about 20. So I was pretty okay with that. I was young, so I didn't really think too much about it.
Great. So your mom went through the surgery, right?
Yeah.
How was that for you, her going through that process?
I mean, it was hard not having her like be able to do everything for that summer. I know her surgery was like the first day of school, so that was hard. But I mean, I knew that she was doing what was best for everyone, so.
And how is she now, 3 years later?
Great.
Good. And tell me just, you know, you have this knowledge and you had this experience in your family. Do you think about this or worry about this very much?
I don't worry about it, but I wonder about it a lot. I just know that if I have it or if I don't. Mm-hmm. But it's really not that much of a worry to me.
Knowing about it, does that interfere with your life in any way, or you feel like you're going on with your life in a completely normal way?
I think I'm completely normal.
And do you think you'll be tested when you get older?
Yeah.
And what will that mean to you?
Well, I know if I do have it, then I won't be afraid, because I know that there are so many resources and options for me that I'm going to be okay even if I don't have it.
Okay. Thanks so much, Emily.
Yeah.
So Kathleen, there we have two videos, you know, one a sort of a late school age tween-ish, and then adolescent discussing such an important topic with you. I feel like that comes up a lot more now too, about the genetic piece of cancer and how that impacts children and especially adolescents.
Right, and not just cancer, other diseases too that we know have genetic variables. I mean, MS and ALS, some of the neurologic disorders. And I mean, the only thing that you can almost eliminate being familial now is an accident, but so many illnesses tend to either run in families because of genetics or because of family life situations that exposure or whatever, so that yeah, it's hard. We used to be able to say you can't catch this, and you still can't catch it in the sense of a cold, but boy, there certainly are a lot of variables for us to consider these days. So those were two, I think, great examples of older children thinking back, and in this case thinking back, and in one case actually thinking about current situations as to what it was like for them when they were facing all this. And I think you saw Especially like in the first video, you saw a young girl talking about who she talked to. I think in this age group, you've got to remember that parents may not be the ones that children are going to talk to. Adolescents tend to talk to their friends more, or to somebody else, sometimes another adult in their lives that is a trusting adult. So often parents want to be the person that children, teens and preteens will come to, but they're just not going to be. So parents have to think a little farther, don't they? They have to think about who the trusted resources are for these kids and allow those trusted resources to be the people who provide the information. So, and I think these both show really good examples of great resilience on the part of teenagers. You know, that it's always a difficult age, and when life gets disrupted for teenagers, you never know for sure how things are going to come out. But often there are resources for teenagers, and we can be some of those resources, again, depending on what your role is with this family and how much you're going to be able to work with them. Sometimes kids do need interventions. Sometimes they need interventions related to their schoolwork. The first child talked to you about how her school got really disrupted and how she didn't know she'd be able to make it through. And maybe for a younger child, a parent might be the best intervener, but for a teenager or for a preteen, it might be the professional who's working with that child. So those are all really kind of important components. The other thing is that we have to remember that adolescents aren't consistent in their response to parental illness or injury. Some adolescents immediately want to jump in and be helpful, and they want to do things for the parent. They don't want to go to school because they want to stay home and care for the parents. And it's a really honest wanting to be helpful and be part of the family. Other adolescents want to get away from it in every way that they can. They want to spend time with their friends. They don't want their friends to come to their house. They don't want people to see what their family's dealing with. It may be guilt. It may just be avoidance and trying to not face what the situation is at home. So I think maybe even more than in other age groups, I mean, in all age groups, we're going to be trying to look at what children's reactions are. But in this age group, it's critical to really understand what it is that the teen is responding to and what it is that would be helpful to them. And it's not going to be very predictable. It will be individual by individual kid and individual family by individual family.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to take a jump. Kathleen, I'm going to let you address what do we think about like changes in families and some of these bumps in the roads that we might see? Sure.
Well, you know, I think that we looked at all the developmental levels just in the last few minutes, and we've tried to kind of break things up by developmental level, but there are also overall family systems things that we have to look at in order to understand what somebody needs. And one of the things that I think is really important when we're dealing with an adult illness or injury is that there are, I don't know if you want to call them stress points or high risk points. There are different points as things happen in the family that cause children to react. So in helping a parent to help their child, what we want to do is make sure that they're very aware of these different points. And you can see some of them listed on this slide. Anytime routines change, anytime the treatment plan for a parent changes, if they're going to get some kind of treatment once a week and then all of a sudden it becomes every day, that's disruptive. That's disruptive for the family, and then it's going to be disruptive. And even if the child has adapted well, they may start not adapting as well. They may start having some issues and problems. So what we're asking parents to do is to be very aware and very alert. And remember, we're asking parents to do something difficult because their treatment's changing too. So it's hard for them to be paying even extra attention to what's happening in their family while they're having to pay extra attention to the changes that are going on in their own routine and their own lives. So it's a difficult thing to ask, but knowing that these, I think Missy refers to them as bumps in the road, knowing that these bumps in the road are going to come means paying attention to them and being prepared to provide more information or more support or some sort of intervention, step back into family meetings, step back into going to that community resource center that's available, somehow giving the family overall and the kids some extra support during those times and then knowing and assuming and hoping that things will go back to routines when this bump in the road gets passed. That's kind of what we're all trying to do as we go through these situations, and how we need to help families look at these situations.
Right, and some of those things you just talked about were those bumps in the roads, the different changes and routines. Let's talk about these. We're going to go specifically through each of these four, so I'm just going to leave this slide up for a second, but we'll look a little closer at these especially challenging times that we can potentially see intervention is necessary for children.
Right. Many of you will be contacted to help a family at the time of diagnosis. That's when a family needs us, and in that sense, I mean Child Life and other psychosocial support people the most, because not only do they have the educational component that they've probably never had to do and never thought about doing, but they also have the emotional component that they need to be able to do. So that kind of early bump in the road, the initial diagnosis time, this is one of the hard things, and that's why there are several components of it that you're seeing in those slides. I mean, first of all, there's talking about what's going on, dealing with issues, and then and providing all the kind of education and information at an appropriate level. And we know that's a big task. I mean, for you, for example, in your emergency departments, or maybe you're in an ICU, assigned to an ICU, and you're asked to do this, you're not going to sit down and do this in a 15-minute session. It's not going to happen. So you really have to figure out how much can I give this family at any one point in time.
And when I think about questions here, and when it comes up about questions, I think it's always important too to remember, and we all probably know this already, but answering the questions that are asked, because you alluded to that earlier. They're not going to worry about all those lists of things we had for each developmental level, but really answering the questions that are asked, and not inadvertently planting a seed or a question that wasn't necessarily theirs initially.
Exactly.
So here, we just listed here the kind of things that we all know, right? That honest, accurate information, the person seriously ill, the name of the disease, and what you understand the course of the illness to be. Anything else on this one, Kathleen, or should we click to the next?
Well, only that the last one's really important, because children do want to know kind of what's going to happen. And the older the child, the more they want to know that. Younger children may be comfortable with just understanding what will happen this week or even one day, but older kids are going to want to know what's going to happen down the road. So all you can do is try to assess the child and family well enough to be able to kind of make a good determination of what their time frame is, what it is that's on their minds. And that means them talking more than you talking. So, anytime, and I tell this to parents all the time, anytime you can find that the children are talking more and you're talking less, you're probably doing a really good job. I would say that that's also true for us as professionals. If we can give some information and then back off and ask some open questions that allow the child to talk about the things that they're worried about, or the family in general, if you're meeting with the entire family, then we're probably doing the best job possible. And that's when, as Missy said, you can make sure that you're only answering the questions that they have and not putting other issues kind of out there that are really too soon to be addressed and maybe not on anyone's mind.
Great. So these are yours. So anything you want to add about these? I think in particular you wanted to address that last one.
Right. I think you saw that in the videos that you just watched, that so many children want to know who's going to take care of them and who's going to do the things that they normally need, especially when you get from preschool on. And even older children are concerned. And for older children, it's very hard to ask, who's going to take me to my soccer game, when the parent is talking about a very serious illness or an injury or some serious medical event that's going on in the family, because they'll be like, they could be worried that that's not as important, or that will not be seen as important, or that will be seen as somehow selfish. So they don't ask those things, but those things are on their mind. So one of the things we always do when we're assessing is finding out kind of what those routine things are that children kind of expect from their parents. If parents have always come to a child's gymnastics class or their drama club or whatever that child is involved in their lives, and all of a sudden they're not going to be able to do that. We've got to help children know that in advance and get prepared for that. It's like preparing them for anything else that's a change, like all the preparation that you do for medical events. You have to prepare them for what's going to change in their lives.
Well, and I think the other part of that is they, especially adolescents, they wonder if they're going to have an additional burden of responsibility, right? Am I going to have to do things that I didn't have to do before? And I don't want to sound ungrateful and insensitive by saying I'd rather be with my friends. So they're in that sort of disconnect, right? Where they're afraid they're going to get an extra burden of responsibility, but they don't want to say it because that might not be okay to say.
Right, right. So especially the older children, older school age and adolescent children, they're screening their comments all the time. You know that just in life and development, and they're certainly going to do it when they're dealing with this serious illness. And then let me go back to the can I catch it question before we look at this next video. That used to be such a simple question. We would say no. And I think with all the changes in medicine now, we have to be really careful not to do anything that's absolute when we know that there's genetic component to what the person is dealing with. And there are so many diseases where there are major genetic components now. So just be really careful to say, if you're going to say you can't catch it, you can't catch it like a cold. It doesn't come from germs. It's not like COVID-19. Whatever the connection that you want to make is, so that children know that they can still hug their parent and, eat with their parent and breathe the same air as their parent, and they're not going to get this disease. But make sure that you're listening for that other kind of question, which is not just am I going to catch it, but am I going to get it someday? Am I going to have this same disease someday? Because the question is bigger than just catching them.
Yeah, you're right. That's so important. All right, I'm going to play this. We're going to hear just a little bit from an expert about sharing information, and then we're going to move through the next couple slides quickly so we can get to the end just in case there's some questions. Remember, if you have them, to go ahead and type those in the Q&A box.
My name is Olua, and the school I go to is PS9, and I'm 7, and I'm going to turn 8 in November 14th. My mom is nice. She'll do nice things if you be nice to her. The day I found out she had cancer, it wasn't really bad. It just felt like a normal day. I didn't know what cancer was because I never heard of it. I didn't get really mad. I just went through the things I had to do. I feel like the kids, they really want to know. I think their mother or father should tell them the truth. Things gonna go in your life good and sometimes bad. If my mom died, I would want to die too. See, I just don't want my family to die. I want to be with them forever and never if they're in heaven and I'm here, I want to be with them. When my mom felt better, I felt better too. I think my whole family's gonna be alright. Y'all can talk to other kids, saying that you don't have to worry about.
So I love that optimism in his voice that comes through, but also the part where he highlights, I think my family's going to be okay. If my mom's okay, we're all going to be okay, and seeing how that family dynamic has an impact on adjustment overall. Kathleen, I'm going to jump us to here. We were talking about some bumps in the road and some of these times when we might have to provide some more significant intervention. So let's talk about real or symbolic separations.
Sure. And that was one of those times that we said was a high risk time. So obviously if a parent has to be in the hospital, that's a separation. If a parent has to be away from the family because of treatment, ongoing treatment, not maybe hospitalized, but maybe every day or on a regular basis be away from the family, that's a separation. So that's real clear cut, and children need to be prepared for that. But the other, and I'm going to skip here, I'm going to jump, because the other kind of separation that goes on is when parents are home and are there, but can't do what they normally do. And although parents may not think of that as a separation, and if you talk to them about it, they may tell you, but I'm not separate from them, I'm home. But really they're home and taking naps, they're home and in bed, they're home with no energy, so that when a child says in a very normal way, watch me do this, or let's do that, they can't respond in the way that they used to respond. That's another separation. We have to help parents see that children need to be prepared for that situation too. And then finally, obviously a real separation is death itself. And you've heard several children in these videos talk about that. But even the fear of death on the part of a child, maybe from a parent, for a parent who's really, the chance of death is really minimal, but the fear of it can be immobilizing and cause a child to pull away. So I think that in all these kind of separation times, a lot of work has to go into helping the child understand, again, the basics that we talked about before. Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to do the things a parent doesn't do when the separations, either real or symbolic, have to occur? And what will impact, how will it impact their lives? So if you can help a child understand that in the ways that are important to that child, you'll be able to help the family move past those times. And obviously you're gonna, when a parent is sick, that's gonna be another stressful time for children. When you're seeing, you saw the one girl saying, I was scared when my mom was hooked up to tubes and I saw blood in those tubes. It wouldn't have taken a lot to prepare that child for seeing that, but nobody probably had the opportunity to do that in advance. So those are things that we're going to ask you guys as professionals when you're with a family to really use your kind of incredible professional ability to think about, from a child's perspective, what are they going to experience and see, and then how can we help that child be prepared for those kinds of things. It's very difficult for a child to see a parent sick. It's difficult for them to see them weak. It's hard to see any of the body changes that go on, like hair loss, scars, all of that sort of thing. So all of those changes are opportunities for somebody, hopefully if we can empower parents or we do it ourselves, someone to help prepare a child for what they're going to see, give them some choices, let them see them, and dose themselves, as Missy was talking about earlier, at a level that's comfortable for them.
And with these body changes, the body changes are those physical, visible things we see. Kathleen, I know you've talked a lot about this when you and I have talked, and I think it's so important about addressing the facts, but also the emotions with that. You want to comment a little more on that?
Yeah, just it's so easy. And I did say earlier that when you have to have an abbreviated intervention with a family, it's okay to stick to facts. It's okay to be educational, because you are protecting the family from opening a door to something that you can't close. However, with all of the kinds of interventions that we do, ultimately, when we do our very best job, we not only provide information, we also provide opportunities for the person to process emotions related to that information. So if you're going to talk about hair loss, you describe it, you may show a doll with no hair, you may show photographs, whatever you want to do to prepare a child, in the same way you'd prepare in other child life areas of responsibility. But you also then want to help the child to say, what do you think it's going to be like for you? Do you have any worries about that? You know, you ask open-ended questions, hopefully not just yes and no answers, that allow the child to begin to process that in advance of the experience that they're going to have. We want to let that emotional level come out when we're empowered as a professional to be able to support that emotion when it does come out.
So we're going to just quick switch to assessment. I'm going to turn to Kathleen in just a second to share some comments on assessment. And we have one question that I'll read out loud after we get through these just next two slides. But someone did also ask, they're wondering in our next webinars if we're going to give examples of how to work with children, what to say, etc., about the fear of a parent dying. And yes, so this is sort of a three-part series. Kathleen and I are just sort of laying the groundwork of what to think about, what are the things you need to know about the impact and the assessment piece of it. And then our next two will really look at those interventions. The one in October, we'll talk about brief interventions. And those are really going to be the kind of things that if you're meeting with parents in a hospital, or you're in the, in the ICU, or you're only talking to the parents. So stay tuned, because those next three, it's sort of a building. It's here's the foundation, here's what you can do with brief interventions, and here's what you can do with more ongoing interventions. But Ilana, I'm going to get to your question in a minute too. So Kathleen,
Missy and I talked a lot about the fact that many of you are only put in touch with these families when there is a death either coming or imminent or has even already happened. That's when Child Life often gets called in, when you're in a hospital. Not necessarily so much when you're in private practice or in a community setting, but even in private practice, your referral may come either at the time of death or after a death. So I asked Missy specifically, is someone going to cover that? And I think in the next two sessions, both short-term and long-term, because sometimes you'll work long-term with the family around the issue of death, and sometimes you only have a single session. One time in the emergency department where the parent has been brought in, a resuscitation is attempted, the person has died, and you have that half hour with that well parent who's in huge grief at that point. What can you do at that time? So I'm assuming that's what that question is about. It's a really valid and important question, and I think it will be covered really well in the next two chats. So I hope that you tune in and get your CEUs, or at least get get the information and have a chance to discuss that issue, because I know it's one of the big ones. But what I want to stress on this slide in our last couple of minutes is just this whole issue of assessment. I know you've gotten it pounded into your head. Everyone in Child Life does, and I'm glad, because it's critical. But just remember that what you're going to do with a family should always be adjusted to what you have learned about the family on an ongoing basis. So you're assessing during your intervention, during your interaction, during the intervention that you do, over the time that you have with the family, and you're constantly changing. The fact that someone would walk into a room and plan to do, for example, in a legacy activity without any assessment of the family and their needs, that worries me, because that should never be what we do. We should never be deciding in advance to do something concrete without assessing what's most useful for that family. What are they asking for? What are they worried about? How are they responding to our introduction and to what we're describing early on about what is available to them? All of that information is going to lead you to the next steps. You're going to have a kind of a suitcase of possible interventions that you do. You're going to get them in the next two chats, but none of them are going to be definite. They're all going to depend on what you assess and how that assessment changes over time. So don't ever plan, and don't let anybody make you. And I think sometimes I hear from Child Life people, but a nurse expected me, or someone, the doctor in the emergency department thought that I would do X, Y, or Z. Don't let anybody make you do what your assessment is leading you not do. Make sure that there's a really good reason always for what you end up doing as part of your intervention.
So on this last slide, we kind of want to pull it all together a little bit. We've covered important topics to consider. We really wanted to give you an idea or a lens to look through when you're working with children of adult patients, the adult caregivers, doing your assessment. We really wanted to help frame a lens for you by looking at the developmental impact of an adult's illness. We wanted to talk about those times that are higher risk, those changes, or the times that they could potentially need more intervention than others. So here's sort of a brief summary of the most significant points to maybe consider. Kathleen, you're going to highlight a couple of things on this slide, I believe.
Right, yeah, these are all really important points, but one of the things that I wanted to remind you of is that children have periods between these points where they really do go on with their lives. And I think that's one of the most encouraging things that we can tell parents is, yes, it's really hard at diagnosis. Yes, it's really hard when you have to go into the hospital. Yes, it's even hard when you come home from the hospital. But in between those times, children will get back into their routines, they'll get back into their lives, and they will adapt. And I think from working with so many families, and I know Missy's in the same situation, what we see is that when you can help parents really understand that their children will be okay, their children will be able to understand this information, process it, work with it, and then go on with their lives in a healthy way, even if the diagnosis is one that will be long-term and chronic, or even if in the ultimate situation, the diagnosis is one that will lead to death. Even in those situations, children can still have healthy lives and can learn to cope. And what we can do is give the family some tools to help those children learn those things. So I guess that's the kind of point that we're all trying to make to these families as we work with them, whatever the point in time is that we contact them.
Yeah, that hopeful part of it, right? The hopeful piece.
Right.
So we have a couple.
I guess I want to say not false hope, real hope, not false hope that a person's going to have a miracle and survive a life-threatening illness, but real hope that no matter what happens with that illness, these children can learn to cope, they can be resilient, they can even gain some skills that they wouldn't have had otherwise to handle tough things in their lives. If you can communicate that hope to families, you will have made a great inroad at helping the family deal with this illness.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Kathleen. And actually it leads to this question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the end slide that has the QR code in case you need to go to the PDU store. And then also we're going to stay on and answer a couple of these questions. Again, my sincerest apologies about us dropping in the beginning of the presentation. I will go back and look at it, and if I feel like we need to re-record before posting it, I'll get with my friend Kathleen and we hopefully can get that done for you. But again, thank you for those who stuck with us on this. So I'm going to switch the slide, but Kathleen, what you were saying about what can we convey to parents, I think is sort of a jumping off point for this question we have. It says, as an outpatient oncology social worker who rarely meets with the children and only works with the parent throughout treatment, what is the most helpful thing that I can do for the parent and vicariously for their children?
Wow. Wow, that's a great question. And it's a challenging question because I know how limited time can be for outpatient social workers. But I think one of the things we just talked about is if we can help parents understand that their children can cope with this, can get through this without being permanently harmed for their life. The way that the parent can do that is by providing children with information appropriate to their age and point by point along the journey, and providing a child with opportunities to express their emotions appropriate for their age and point by point along the journey. If we can help parents understand that giving children somehow those two things, the information, the opportunities for expression, we're going to help children move through this journey in the most healthy way possible. So that's very global, I know, because obviously everything would be much more specific for an individual family, but that's really the bottom line. Not telling children falsehoods, telling them the truth, trusting their child's resilience and trusting their child's ability to move forward with this, and trusting their families' kind of ability to work on a problem together as a family. And rather than the parents feeling like they have to carry the whole burden by themselves without involving the children.
Mm-hmm. And I think the one other piece of that, and potentially if you're having these brief interventions, and again, we'll talk about this in the next chat, but is normalizing things like we talked about earlier, like normalizing things for parents based on their child's age. It's absolutely normal for them to not want to talk to you after they're an adolescent and talk to their friends. And I think normalizing some of those reactions, if in fact they are, for the parents, that can be helpful too, and sort of take that burden or that worry off of a parent that their child might be experiencing or acting in a different way. So I think that could be another piece of that.
And I guess for the person who asked this question, for the social worker who asked this question, I think another part of this is, and you guys do this really, really well, is really empathizing with how hard it must be for the parent to think about addressing these awful issues with their child. first of all, before you do anything else, is really kind of going into the space that they're in, which is no parent wants to tell their children about something as awful as a serious illness in one of the caregivers of those children. You just don't want to do that. And the natural response to that is to just avoid it, to try to stay away from it, to try to not do it, to find some reason not to do it. So I think the more we can empathize with the parents' probably desire to not kind of step into that space and bring something up that's going to be distressful for a child, then the more the parent will be able to hear us when we say, but you know, when you do address it, when you do talk about it, when you do provide the child with information, when you do allow them to express their emotions, what you're doing is opening the door for the child to be able to really cope with this, build strength and resilience over the course of this illness that they will be able to use in their entire lives, and continue to feel trust in their mom and their dad, or whoever the caretakers are in the family. So that empathy that I think we all do with families when we first meet them, really knowing that this is just an awful thing for a parent to have to do, to share this. But here's why you need to share this, and then going to that place.
Yeah. And I think that's that difference with the adult illness, right? Like, because it's scary to have to say that to your child. I think the other point too, and I'm thinking about in the adult oncology world, is that oftentimes there's that, I call them the sort of the dark days, unfortunately, where you have a diagnosis, but you don't quite know what you're going to do about it yet. And parents grapple with that. There's all these emotions going on in a family based on the diagnosis, but they say, should I tell my child? Do I want to tell them now because I don't have a plan yet? And so helping them navigate bits and pieces, giving the information about the illness, and this is what I know so far, and when I know more, I will let you know. Like that part, and again, to that empathy part about being in that dark space with them when they don't quite have the answers yet either themselves.
Yeah. I mean, we say it all the time, but we know that children are very aware when something changes in the family. And if mom and dad are having secret whispering conversations, or mom is not available to do the things with their children that she did, children know that something's up. They know that something's wrong. And I have heard a number of kind of wild fantasies, especially from younger children, about what they thought was going on. One of the most common in this day and age is they're getting a divorce. I'm afraid my mom and dad are getting a divorce. I heard them arguing, or I heard them whispering, or I heard dad slam the door, or I heard mom cry. And you don't want that to be the burden that your child carries. Much better that they know what really is going on, even if you don't have final answers, than that they think it's something horrible or there's something that they've done.
I often say their hearing gets best when people are whispering, right? And so parents are whispering, children's ears perk up, and then they get bits and pieces, and then they fill in the gaps. And that's when those things that you're talking about, Kathleen, come to light. I want to go to Bindi. Bindi, I think it's more of a comment, but tell me if I'm wrong, Bindi, but it says, I always think that identifying current need is the important outcome of assessment. Is that a question that others ask themselves before they jump into intervention? I read it a little bit like you're validating that you're saying, yes, we need to assess the current need and address that need before we just jump, sort of based on like what Kathleen was talking about, just going in with a set plan. Bindi, can you let us know if that did not address what you were asking while I jump to this next question?
Well, before you ask the next question, I think if this is what you're talking about, there's some really clear examples of that. You may go in planning to do something educational with the child, or with a parent, and then you start to talk, and that person bursts into tears and is sobbing. The current need is not to get the information. The current need has now switched to somehow getting that emotion out, feeling like you have some control over that emotion, and then hopefully processing that emotion and identifying what that was about. So whatever you went into that session with in terms of, okay, I'm going to educate about, the impact of having IVs at home or something like that, has nothing to do with ultimately what you need to do, because what you need to do is to address that outpouring of emotion. And it can be the other way too. You may expect emotion and get an information need that totally switches what you do. So, I absolutely agree. I think that is ultimately what the outcome is of assessment, is what are the next steps I need to take? What is the person really letting me know that they need right now?
Oh yeah, so Bendy said, yes, that is exactly what I mean. I think it's better to continually assessing at every moment. Kathleen is saying it. So there we go. We're perfect on there. So let's go to this question, Kathleen. How do you respond when a caregiver's ask, are they going to need therapy from this? I had blank experience when I was little and I had such a hard time.
So I guess that I would want to know the context of that question, but I would want to say to a parent who asked me that many children, if not most children, go through these kinds of life challenges. And this is a challenge. Having a serious illness in the family is a challenge. Go through these kinds of life challenges very successfully. And actually, especially when they have support, either from their parents or from other people, and there are many resources in communities now, in many communities, not in all, to help families. I mean, Wonders and Worries that Missy represents is a great one, and there are more and more of those available. So you kind of want to say any resources that you can hook your child up with now that will support them will mean that it's less likely that they will need anything major in terms of intervention later on down the road. However, depending on how this goes, some people need some time later on to process it. And I have known children who have come back and said, who didn't want to process, for example, the death of a parent, just didn't want to do it, didn't want to talk about it, still went on with their lives, but then at some point, 3 or 4 or 5 years later, felt the need to talk to somebody about what that was about. And I guess the difference is that therapy because there's a pathology? To me, it's not. It's supportive intervention because there's something left unresponded to that still needs some response. And that's different than a diagnosis of depression or a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder or something like that. So I'd kind of want to know what that person meant by therapy. Do you mean the person will have a mental illness? Almost never. But do you mean the person might need some additional support? That might happen down the road somewhere. And the more that they can process it now, the less likely it is that it will happen. That's how I would answer that question.
Thank you. And I have another question on here from Jeannie. And hopefully she didn't sign off yet because she put 2. But can you also speak about single parent households from whom the diagnosis causes loss of employment, worries of loss of housing, transition plan for the child and children if the caregiver dies, where concerns are about housing, school changes, etc. Which is, I mean, that brings so many of those additional losses with it.
That's so huge. And I'm glad you brought it up because it is not uncommon in this age. And it adds so many complexities. I can tell you that for me, the work that I've done, and I was in a community setting, so I could have long-term interactions with children. But almost every time I've had to go to court around any issue related to a child has been in a single family situation. So the risks are just really huge. And again, the best you can do is try to prioritize the needs. If the family's got no money to buy food or, are about to lose the place they live, the sick parents, sick single parent and children, then somehow those become the priority. It's not the psychosocial issues have to take a back seat to just making sure that that family is safe and has a roof and has food and the parent can get to treatment. But so you're looking back at kind of Maslow's hierarchy now of what do you need to deal with first to try to help the family, and then what can you deal with later. But again, and that reflects back to that kind of ongoing assessment. When you're meeting with that family the first time, if you've only got one meeting and if they say our biggest problem is I don't know where my next money's going to come to feed my children or feed my baby, then that may have to be your focus. You may not do any of this developmental stuff or any of this psychosocial stuff. It may be, what can you find that would be resources for that family so they can have food on the table or pay for their electricity? It's just really hard. You have to take it a step at a time, but it is fraught with potential challenges all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think we'll go ahead and wind down. I appreciate those of you who stuck with us a little bit after. Kathleen, always a pleasure to be with you. I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today, sharing your nuggets of wisdom. I could probably have you on here every month to share lots of nuggets of wisdom. Those of you who are still on, if you want to, I would appreciate your evaluation at the end. The QR code for the PDU is on the screen at the moment. And I hope you will think about joining us for the next 2 in this kind of series, if you will, that will address some specific interventions. I know that those are very much appreciated usually in the webinars about, just give me some ideas of things to do after your assessment, that you can do with families and children. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for those as well. But again, thank you for joining us. Many thanks to you, Kathleen. Always a pleasure. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.